Let me just introduce who's going to be here, what we're going to be doing and why we're going to be doing it. This is a session that is being put together by the Rose Castle Foundation, a team that's been involved is myself and a colleague called Nadia. The Rose Castle Foundation is involved with peace building and reconciliation, but it's also the home of scriptural reasoning. Now, you may well have heard of scriptural reasoning. If you haven't, it's a fascinating practice where people from different faith traditions bring together their sacred texts or carriers of significant meanings for those who don't have texts in the traditional sense. And they bring together the different texts and they read the stories and come together with an aim of seeking to learn and understand not only about another person, but also to more fully understand their own perspectives. So it's a two-way thing. You're learning about others, but also you're learning about what you think yourself. Now, secondly, scriptural reasoning holds right at the center of it, this idea that difference is okay. And it's okay to believe things that are different, but we do so with respect. So when we ask questions, we learn and we understand more, but we don't necessarily have to always agree. And thirdly, we find that actually when people do this together in an interfaith context, a space of hospitality, friendships are developed and people get to know each other in a way that maybe they wouldn't if they weren't able to be as honest about the things that they believe. So the theme for today is where can we find wisdom? And we've got three wonderful people who are going to share from their faith tradition a little bit about what they think and what they believe about wisdom and where it comes from. So we've got Gurpreet, who is from the Sikh tradition. We have got Rabbi Jeremy Lawrence, who is from the Jewish tradition, and then we have Robin Nanda, who's from the humanist tradition, and they have put together some text packs and they've prepared some information to share with us. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite each one of them to come just to share a little bit about the story and the text that they've chosen, then to read their story, and then there'll be a chance for the other participants to ask questions. We're going to ask teachers to save questions to the end. So we're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes for each of the participants to share something. And then at the end, you will have lots of chance to ask questions. If there are any things that come to mind as you are listening, do feel free to put them in the chat box. If you put them in the chat box, that will help us to know what you're thinking and to help prompt the conversation later on. But I do hope that this afternoon you are going to enjoy some wonderful stories from different faith traditions and end up having your eyes open to different ways of seeing things that maybe you haven't seen before. So it's a really enjoyable process that we're going to be taking part in. I'm going to ask Hannah if she can start to share the screen, and I'm going to invite Gurpreet first of all. Gurpreet, if you'd just like to introduce yourself briefly, and then introduce your text. And Hannah is going to pin you so that we see you, and everybody else is going to disappear just for the next 5 or 10 minutes whilst you share this, and then we'll have a little conversation. So over to you, Gurpreet.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Gurpreet. I'm from the Sikh tradition. I'm a volunteer for the Sikh Education Council, and I'm also a secondary teacher in mathematics. Today's stories on Baba Buddhaji, and I'll just introduce the Sikh way. So Sikhs believe that wisdom comes from within through divine experience. The path that leads to this experience is shown to us by the grace of the true Guru. The divine knowledge of the Sikh Gurus is preserved within the sacred pages of the Guru Granth Sahib, the eternal Guru, which together with the Sangat, the community of practice, enables Sikhs to develop the character and habits that form the requisite to divine experience. As such, Sikhs regularly reflect, meditate on, and make manifest in their daily practice the wisdom contained within the Guru Granth Sahib. Guru Nanak would travel far and wide to share his wisdom for the benefit of all, Sarbat Da Bala, regardless of caste or creed. This story is about a little child, Baba Buddha Ji, he met in a village of Katunangal in Punjab. So this story is from the Gospel of the Sikh Gurus, which is a translation of and commentary of Sikhadi Bhagatmala by Mani Singh. Bhai Mani Singh was a revered Sikh, and he is one of the transcribers of the Guru Granth Sahib. So Guru Gobind Singh would dictate and he would write down. So he's very his family was with the Gurus for a long time, and this story is from the oral tradition, but it is captured in many different sources. Baba Buddha Ji is also famous for being for coronating the successive Gurus after Guru Nanak. So the second Guru, Guru Angad, would have had a coronation ceremony where he was made the Guru, and it was Baba Buddha Ji who placed a coconut before him, which was the what became the tradition of carrying the Guruship from one Guru to the next. So he did this up to Guru Har Gobind Singh, who was the sixth Guru, and he lived to over 100 years old. So he did in fact become very old. Without further ado, I'll begin. Baba Buddha Ji was born in 1506. His birth name was Burra. As a child, whilst grazing outside his village, he met Guru Nanak. Burra made an offering of milk to Guru Nanak and made a humble request to be removed from the cycle of birth and death. The Guru said, "You are but a child, yet you speak so wisely." Then Burra proceeded to tell Guru Nanak about how Mughal soldiers had come and ransacked their families' fields, taking all the crops, regardless of whether they were ripe or unripe. At that moment, Burra had realized that just as no villager could stop the Mughals from taking their crops, nobody could stop death, which could come at any time, whether one is young or old. Guru Nanak was amazed by Burra's maturity. Guru Nanak renamed him Baba Buddha Ji, which means old man, on account of the wisdom he displayed.
Well, thank you so much, Gurpreet.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to ask Hannah if she can just pin Rabbi Jeremy and Robin and Gurpreet, and then I'm going to invite Rabbi Jeremy. Is there anything that Gurpreet has said that you wanted to ask or ask for clarification, or anything that you noticed?
So I think it's an absolutely wonderful story, first of all, and beautifully delivered. I really like the idea of this wisdom coming up, and the very human elements that you've got in it. So you've got the milk, the birth and death, the ransacking of houses. There's some very gritty ideas there, which are very human. Just as a question, what are we supposed to understand by calling someone old man? I mean, that happens in different traditions, but you know, does that represent learnt experience, or, you know, sometimes my experience from old men is also cynicism?
Yes, so that's a good question, and we do have this tradition in most societies of the elders of the tribe or elders of the village being the wise ones, and to a certain extent that wisdom does come through experience, but you could grow old without becoming wise as well. And then there's the distinction of knowledge versus wisdom. So with wisdom, it's something that you can apply across different subjects or different matters in life, whereas knowledge is kind of recalling of facts or historical stories, or you can become very knowledgeable without becoming particularly wise. So Yeah.
So what I love in that, so if I can come back in, is just this idea of applied knowledge, which is your description of wisdom, the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff. In your youth, everything becomes a crisis, indeed, and everything is significant. Indeed, everything is now becomes a drama on television and radio and in the media. I mean, age gives the ability to say this too will pass, or this is less significant, and the acceptance of knowledge and the ability to put it into perspective. So I was reading the story when I was asking about when I was asking the question about what the wisdom and the age means here. I think we've got the details at the beginning, and then the appellation at the end as the recognition that he's come beyond just the basics.
Yeah, indeed, and the Guru Harikrishnan was only about 6 years old when he became guru. So just imagining that you're bowing down and perceiving as most knowledgeable someone that is just 5, 6 years old, and that's quite a difficult thing to actually imagine, especially say that was your son or daughter per se, or that sort of situation.
Yeah, that's really encouraging, isn't it? If you're telling that story with children, to actually see themselves as being wise in that story. Yeah. Robin, was there anything that you wanted to ask or to clarify?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, by the way, Anne, for the invite to be here today. It's a real pleasure to hear others talking. I'm looking forward to your talk as well, Rabbi Jeremy. But thank you, Gurpreet. That was really, really interesting. And I think I know less about the Sikh religion than I do some other religions, which makes today even more special, actually, to kind of get a sense of your worldview. And maybe just following on from a question that Jeremy asked, and I guess I've got this whole idea of, like Jeremy, perhaps, of old men and their wisdom. And I'm just thinking, in society at the moment, we've had an experience of lots of old men, and maybe we would begin to question some of their wisdoms, certainly in the UK, but I can think of old men in other countries that perhaps are being questioned, their wisdom, even though they might describe themselves as being perhaps, I don't know, a genius, say. Perhaps so I can phrase it that way. But I'm wondering then, so how easy is it to question the wisdom of old men, whether that's something that's done, whether that's part of the discussion that happens in Sikhism? So how easy is it to do that questioning? And I guess the other question is, are there old wise women too? Are they there?
Very good questions. And taking the first one, I believe that's asking like passing a test. Is that right? I think that's what you were asking. And Guru Nanak, when he was going to choose the guruship, who's going to go after him, he did put some tests through to test his sons. They both failed in the test, and then the most devoted follower, who would follow him without question per se, became the next guru. So part of that is the humility and accepting that you there is someone that is wiser than you, and that humility, I think, is the essence of wisdom as well, knowing that there is so much that you don't know and so much yet to learn from others. Oh, and the second question about women, yes, there are women in the Sikh religion that did play important roles. There was one famous story in the Sikh tradition of Mai Bhago, and there were 40 deserters of Guru Gobind Singh, the 10th Guru, when he was held under siege by the Mughal soldiers. And so when the food started to run out, they started questioning the Guru's wisdom, and ultimately they decided to abandon the Guru. And the Guru said, write down on a piece of paper that that I'm no longer your Guru, and then you're free to go. And then when they went back to the village, it was the wife of one of the leaders of the 40 that said, right, well, you put on the washing gloves and I'll go and fight. And let's say if you come and abandon the Guru. And then that put them in shame, and then they went back. So so indeed, so it was Mike Bogle that was the leader in that particular story, and so she led them back to the right way, or the Sikh way.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Gurpreet. That's really, really helpful. And questions. I'm going to turn now to Rabbi Jeremy, and I'm going to ask Hannah if you wouldn't mind sharing the screen again. And we're going to find out a little bit about a Jewish perspective of wisdom. So over to you, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. And just like Robin, delighted to be participating in this and the opportunity to hear from very different faith traditions from the ones I'm normally involved with. So a real wonderful chance to learn. The word rabbi itself is not my name. It's a teacher. And as a rabbi, you know, what my role is to encourage people to be aware of spiritual sources. And one of our spiritual sources is that you should bless wise people when you see them. There's a blessing we see on saying, you know, non-Jewish wise people. And so the idea of external wisdom is a very important concept. And as a rabbi, I am a teacher rather than a particularly holy man. So it's about the transference. Certainly my congregations have never thought I was much of a holy man. Sometimes they enjoyed my teaching. So here, the story, you will know the musical. It was that good, where Joseph comes out of prison before Pharaoh, having interpreted the dreams of the butler and the baker. And here, having been sold into slavery, he now ends up coming out not only as Pharaoh's servant, but as number 2 in Egypt. And the significant part here is that when he interprets the troubled dream of Pharaoh, he doesn't say it's him that has the interpretation. He says that he is acting as a conduit of God. And that is, you know, that's where we're going to pick up. And as for the repetition of the dream to Pharaoh twice, it is because the thing is fast determined by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh identify a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land in Egypt in the 7 years of plenty. And let them gather all the foods of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh. And let them keep food in the cities, and that food shall be a reserve in the land against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land perish not through the famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find a one such as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God? And Pharaoh says to Joseph, since God has shown you all of this, there is none so discreet and wise as you are. You shall be over my house, and according to your word shall all my people be ruled. Only through the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in garments of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck. And he made him to ride in the 2nd chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Avrech, bow the knee, and made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without you shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt.
Thank you, Rabbi Jeremy. I should just say that in the text pack that is actually written out in Hebrew as well. So when you have access to that, you can see the original language. So I'm just going to ask Robin, is there anything from that story that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, it was really, again, a question, if I may, Jeremy. And I guess really I wanted to know how specifically that story would relate to you as an individual. Do you know? What do you specifically take away from it for yourself?
So what I really like from it is, number one, the whole circumstance is about human interaction. and it's about trust built between characters. So I think that's a lovely setting on it, particularly given that Joseph has been betrayed. But it's about trust. It's about trusting people on the outside to inform you. And so Pharaoh, having tried all his magicians and advisors, eventually gets this wretched Hebrew slave to give him advice. And honors that advice once given. So I think it's the opportunity to be a human conduit, to build relationships, and to recognize that wisdom can come from a spiritual top, but equally in terms of the economic plan, which is not from God, that is the Joseph part in it, the ability to recognize that we can learn from and benefit from and acknowledge the wisdom of others and outsiders.
Yeah. And I'd have to say that, the second bit of that, which is very humanistic, actually, from my perspective. So it resonates with, obviously, as a humanist, we wouldn't think that wisdom comes from God because we don't believe in God. That's one of the defining characteristics. But in terms of wisdom coming from people and not necessarily absolutely not being connected to what your status in society might be, or the authority that you might or might not have, but wisdom can come from human beings, is certainly a point that resonates with humanists, that would resonate with humanists.
So where I think we share this is the appreciation that there is always a greater outside wisdom than the internal wisdom, and consulting enables us to find that outside wisdom.
I was doing a talk, just as an aside, and I was in one room, and a rabbi was in the other room, and I was able to say hi just before the talk happened, and I introduced myself as a humanist, and he said, "Oh, that's good to know, because that means there isn't that much difference between us." And I thought it was an interesting observation, which I like very much. And I guess that's also about today in part, isn't it, is to find those connections, those common views, but also, as you're saying, and respecting the differences.
And I think that's why this kind of exercise is always so very valuable.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robin. Gurpreet, was there anything that you'd like to comment on from that story?
Firstly, a wonderful story, and it does really bring out who is wise, who is able to interpret the dreams of that people have had, and it reminds me of there's a few stories in the Jewish tradition. I believe that the Book of David as well. It's nice to draw parallels with that. And I would, one question was, what was it says adapted from Koran. Is that
Koran is one of the translations of the Bible. One of the reasons I put the Hebrew available is because we believe that that there is an original godly text, and all translation is necessarily an interpretation. So changing the these and thous to yous, I think, is very helpful in teaching. And actually, I apologize for not having made that adaptation when I was doing it. But you will find subtle differences in presentation if you look at other translations. I think it's important to just cite the primary source that I was using, and which was the Koran translation. Universal in all translations is the idea that the spirit of wisdom is the concept that Pharaoh identifies, and through that he creates leadership.
I wonder if I could ask another follow-up question, actually. Yeah. And I guess it's just on the back of what you were saying, Jeremy. So that the text that you interpret it, in a sense, you use your kind of own internal wisdom to reflect upon the text. But I guess that also means then that the interpretations can be different between different people and can change over time. And I don't mean that, by the way, as a criticism, absolutely not, but that actually it reflects the human half of that, which is the interpretation of the text, that it's not static, but it changes over time and would change with people. So
if I temporarily get rid of my annoying background, you can see that I've got a mess of books and things behind me. And as I swivel around in my room, that is all, or substantially, that is rabbinic interpretation over 2,000 years of the word of God as we would see it. And it's not just subtle differences, it's argument, and it's tension, and it's adaptation according to the mores of the moment. And that's why the rabbinate is about sharing wisdom rather than just saying we are strict theologians. I mean, there is an application of wisdom into life, and different times and circumstances call on us to respect that.
Thank you. Go on then, Gurpreet. Go on then. Yeah, sorry.
Is there an example in the Jewish tradition of women stepping up, or like a special story that you could share if one comes to
there are several. Deborah is a prophetess and a judge. Esther in the book of Esther is essential to resolving the story. Within the 5 books of Moses themselves, our core text in the Old Testament, there is the story of the daughters of Zelophehad, who is a man who dies intestate, dies without children, male children to inherit. And they say, are we going to lose our inheritance just because we're unmarried and we're not connected with anyone? And their prompting of Moses to get a resolution, and them going to Moses, who then asks God, how am I supposed to handle this, shows courageous women's leadership, the ability to stand up for themselves and to take a stance, even though they have to go through the patriarchy here. Another time we can address that. But they are remembered and honored, and the law that comes from them is known in their name, as a way of dignifying the fact that you shouldn't just imagine that as you have to be a male to be in tune with God and to be able to speak up for yourselves.
Fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you. It was interesting, Rabbi Jeremy. It occurred to me just as you were talking, and you talked about Rabbi being a teacher, not a holy man. It reminded me that guru is a word that is very widely used, as well as somebody who is a teacher and somebody who is able to share wisdom. And I don't know whether it just struck me. These are useful words for children to be aware of when they're talking about these kinds of things and wisdom. Okay, so Robin, I'm going to invite you to share your story. I'm going to ask Hannah if she can just share screen again. Okay, over to you, Robin.
Thank you very much. So just to say a little bit then about humanism, just to give the context, because I often find that it's not necessarily a worldview that people understand automatically. So just to cover that then. So humanists have a non-religious worldview. In short, it really means that we don't believe in God. So we don't believe in God, we don't believe in gods, we don't believe that there's any spiritual or supernatural element. We don't see evidence for that. And therefore, in fact, we think that the evidence points the other way. So humanists don't believe in God. And that therefore sort of separates me out from the 2 other speakers today. And therefore, we wouldn't also use the word faith. And Anne, you've been talking about faith perspectives, but it's not a word that obviously that humanists would use themselves. By the way, we're not precious about that, because you've got to find the language to have a kind of communication. So it's completely okay by me, but we would use the more umbrella term of a worldview. And a religious faith or faith would be within that umbrella term, and humanists are within that umbrella term, and it's a non-religious worldview. But it's not just that, though. It's also a belief, a deeply held belief that the best way to understand the world, the best way to understand ourselves, is through thinking hard about it, actually, and trying to base that on as much evidence as you possibly can. So thinking hard and basing that on the evidence, and also being open, very, very much open to the fallibility. So I know that I've thought hard about lots of things, and I've tried to base that on the evidence, and I've still been very, very wrong. So being open, and maybe just to kind of pick that point that Gurpreet made earlier on, which I thought was lovely, that kind of humility, that sense that we can be wrong, and trying to understand our own biases and our own blind spots. So that's just to give you a little bit about humanists. So that also means, and you can probably work that out for yourself, that we don't have any leaders. We don't have one person that's at the top. We don't have a holy book. Of course, we don't have a holy book. For us, really, it's the sort of combined wisdom of humanity across the ages, across the cultures, including actually the wisdom that would come from religious worldviews and the religion and the wisdom that would come from philosophy and other avenues, really. I guess in a sense, all of these, to use a word that Jeremy used, would be conduits, so ways in for us to think about ourselves and think about the world that we exist in. So that's kind of humanism in a nutshell. We don't have, and like I say, we don't have anyone at the top. And even if we did revere some people, you know, we would very much consider them to be very fallible, because another characteristic about being a human being is you are very fallible, right? So this is a story called The Star Thrower. As you can see there, it's a part of a 16-page essay. You will find this story, and you probably are aware of this story already. You'll find this story used, sort of lots of adaptations of it. Not least because I think it's such a really good story, and it's got a lot contained within quite a few lines of text. It's written by someone called, and I've just forgotten his name. Oh, there it is, Loren Eiseley. So he's a humanist himself, a sort of really man of letters, a scientist, a philosopher, a writer. And this particular story is from a book called, if I can remind myself of this, called The Unexpected Universe. The Unexpected Universe, what a lovely phrase that is. And really, essentially, it's about the human condition. And he sees human beings very much as a sort of quest hero. So we're on a quest, and our quest is to understand the world, understand the universe, understand ourselves, to seek adventure, perhaps, to be good, decent human beings, to make a difference. And some of those elements are within this story, The Star Thrower. Can I just quickly say the themes, because I know I'll forget them by the time we get to them. So for me, at least, the themes that resonate for me and that resonate for humanists, and also may well resonate for many people today in our kind of virtual room. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. You'll find the themes of doing the right thing, helping the powerless, speaking truth to power. And therefore, the next one is being brave and steadfast, even when you're being ridiculed and belittled, and the importance of, let me just close that, the importance of action over inaction, doing something to make the world a different place, a better place, not just wishing that it was a better place. Okay, so thank you very much. I'll read the story, but I think you'll know it already. Star Thrower. One day, a man was walking along the beach when he noticed a girl picking up and gently throwing things into the ocean. The man asked the girl, "What are you doing?" The girl replied, "I'm throwing starfish back into the ocean. The surf is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them back, they'll die." The man laughed. "Don't you realize there are miles and miles of beach and thousands of starfish? You can't make any difference." After listening politely, the girl bent down, picked up another starfish, and threw it gently into the surf. Then, smiling at the man, she said, "I made a difference to that one." So there you are. That's the story.
Thank you, Robin. It's a lovely story. Okay, can I just apologise first of all for my misuse of the word faith perspectives. You're absolutely right, and all the RE teachers will trip me up on this as well, because we now talk about world religions and world views. So you're absolutely right. Thank you for picking me up on that. And yeah, so I want to apologise and thank you for your humility in being willing to let that slip and not take offence. So thank you. I'm going to ask Gurpreet, would you like to see if there's anything you'd like to comment on the story, or anything that Robin has said that has struck you?
Thank you. So listening to the story, some sort of contemporary situations do come in mind in society today. And what I wanted to ask, was there a particular contemporary situation that came to your mind when you read this or chose this story?
That's a great, I mean, it's a great question, Gurpreet, actually. And I think I've had this story in my head probably from a child. I probably had this story before I knew the term humanist. The funny thing about a humanist is that, you know, you kind of often you end up being a humanist, and then later you find that there's a term to describe what you are, and you didn't know that there was that term, and you go, oh, that's me. I'm one of those. I'm that thing they're called a humanist. So it's been around for a very long time. And I think every time I read it, it kind of resonates because I'm different stages in my life. But in terms of, I think there's an obvious resonance, and that obvious resonance for at least for me, Gurpreet, is well, I'm going to say it as it is, which is the climate and ecological crisis that we currently find ourselves in, a crisis that is of our own creating, a crisis that's the result of a lack of wisdom and a surfeit of greed. Do you know? So there's my view. So that's the obvious one. And, you know, I look around and I look at the brave people that are doing their best to make a difference to this terrible situation that we are in, and this terrible situation that we are leaving as a legacy for the generations that follow us, and not just the generations of human beings that are part of this world, but also all the other creatures and all the other species that have to exist there. And from a humanist perspective is that humanists don't see themselves as any greater than any other species. We just see ourselves as one species on this planet. And certainly we don't have dominion or dominance or any of that over them, but rather that we have to coexist on this little precious jewel that floats through the space, through space. So that's the obvious resonance, but I think you can find lots of resonances here. And I mentioned those themes, you know, that ability for the little girl to talk truth to power to the man. I think that was powerful. To say it regardless, to do a kind thing. Funny enough, I don't think that this is absolutely a story about saving starfish, though I think saving starfish is really well worth doing. I mean, as you were saying, Gurpreet, it's wider than that. I also think, in the back of my mind, I was doing a talk in a school recently, nothing to do with humanism, on another subject, but I used this story partly because, Anne, it was in my mind because I was going to use it today. And we were talking about how, as a staff group, it was a school talk I was doing, how as a staff group we can make a difference. And I told the story of the star thrower. And then I imagined there were 300 people in the school. It was a sort of mat type conference. And I imagined if there were those 300 people walking down the beach and they saw the girl throw the starfish into the water, and one or two of them picked up a starfish to throw it gently back into the ocean, and some of them did the same thing, and then some of them did the same thing, then you actually would be able to clear all the starfish from those millions and millions and miles and miles and miles of beach. So in that sense, I also think it's modeling the appropriate thing to do. You know, so there are some of those sort of moral resonances that are there for me.
Absolutely, and particularly for children, I think it's a very valuable lesson in that you do get this sense of frustration if you can't solve a problem straight away, and if it's a big problem, and we do have very big problems, then you do need patience and perseverance, and both of which come out to me in this story. And if something is the right thing to do, as you say, and then it shouldn't make a difference if the difference you make is small, so long as you're persistent and encourage others to do so. So the bigger battles are the ones that make the biggest difference as well.
Yeah. And I think the interesting point, you know, giving some of you, it's interesting, isn't it? I love what you were saying. Also, Jeremy, about this kind of, I hadn't really come across the time of this scriptural reasoning, but using a text and really thinking deeply about it, I think is a lovely way into thinking deeply about all sorts of different things. So thank you for both those texts, Gurpreet and Jeremy. But, you know, one of the things that we've talked about is the wisdom of old men. Sometimes I think that they are contradictory terms, by the way, old men and wisdom. That's often my experience of life. But leaving that aside for one moment, You know, what this girl was questioning the wisdom of an old man on the beach who was laughing at her. You know, so maybe there is some wisdom in the youth too. And I think we're seeing that. I think we're seeing that at the moment in our society, the wisdom of the youth in this instance.
Yeah. Thank you. And lastly, Rabbi Jeremy, is there any response that you wanted to make to?
So first of all, thank you, Robin, for bringing one of my favorite stories. I'm just on the point of wisdom and old men. Of course, the Latin for old man is senex, which gives us the word senile. So we do get different perspectives in that. I first remember hearing this story from late Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who uses it in the introduction of his book To Heal a Fractured World. And I've quoted it many times from there. It's a book written to how faith and wisdom beyond faith can be used as part of addressing world problems. So it's just lovely to hear it and see it again. All of our stories have got this idea of finite commodity. I mean, I had a famine, the crops being destroyed and death in Gurpreet. Here, the surf being up, tide going out, and the starfishes going to go. All of them have got an inferior person, if I can use that, being validated. And the child coming before the guru. Here, the girl before the old man. In my case, the prisoner coming before Pharaoh. And the other thing is, all of them have a renaming element. So in the extended version in the essay, and we get the star thrower is the name given to the person who returns the stars, and the old man being added to the name. And in the Joseph story, Pharaoh then also gives him a new name. So there is this idea of designation coming up with it. A question for you coming out of the story in this incarnation of it. The girl replying to the man why she is doing it. She could have just said, I'm throwing them back, the ones I throw back in live. Do you think that there is a particular poignancy in saying the surf is up, the tide is going out, if I don't throw them back, they'll die? Is that just a literary device, or does that actually convey some meta message? You need to understand the wider picture.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I have to say, so thank you for that, because I hadn't really considered that. Perhaps because this is the version I know, so therefore it's just, you know, part of my being, that therefore it kind of goes unnoticed. But I think there is a meta, and I think the meta is that it underlines, as you said earlier, just then, it underlines the urgency of the situation. Absolutely, I can throw them in and they will survive. That's really, really important. But there is an urgency of situation. The tide is up. If I don't do it soon, if I don't, and I'm going to use two words now, if I don't act now, and by the way, those two words, act now, are the words that climate activists use. If I don't act now, in terms of the story, the starfish will be dead. In terms of us, well, you know, it's not just dead starfish, but it would be dead starfish and so much more in addition. I guess what you've got here is you've got a almost literal deadline, you know,
Right.
and that is that receding surf. And they've got to be in there. It is almost, we use it metaphorically, but here it's metaphorically and almost quite literally a deadline. And they've got to be in there as soon as they can. In terms of this girl, she cannot collect all of the, and that's an interesting word, isn't it? Collect. She cannot collect all of those starfish, but she can make a difference to some. Collectively, we can make a difference to many. One of the lines that's in the book, the extended Unexpected Universe essay, where they talk about collectors, and one of the characters in there says, well, there's only one collector, and of course that's death. Death is the ultimate collector, right. Collects us all. And so I guess in a sense, it's also a fight for life rather than a fight over the acquiescence of death. And that, interestingly, that's surfaced in some of the other stories too.
So if I come back in on that, I think one of the very beautiful ideas is it's not just about the finality of what lies ahead, but it's about empowerment. There is an invitation to join in. And actually, how differently the story would be if, and then the man helped her on the beach. And we don't have that, but how different, it could have been really good. It's about empowerment. You too could be a part of this. It's an invitation there, as well as a statement of what's up. I like the invitation. I like the empowerment.
I think that's interesting. And, you could say, well, which would be the better ending? Would the better ending be, and the man bent down and picked up the starfish? Well, in terms of the starfish, it would most definitely be the better ending. Thank you very much. So we take the starfish perspective. But if we talk about the reality of the world that we actually live in, it's very unlikely that the man will bend down and pick the starfish up if we think that that man is a metaphor for other wise men in our societies. They give up very little, and they hold on and don't necessarily. Change seems to happen from the girl upwards. It doesn't seem to happen from the old men downwards. But I think there is another person in this story, and I think you've identified that person. The other person is us that's reading that story, and that's the invitation to us. Are we going to be like the girl, or are we going to be like the man? And we need to see both of those so that we can make a decision. The decision's made for us. It's obvious which way we need to go. The next question is, will we have the bravery to do it? Will we have the decision and following through on the decision to do that?
So I think
whatever it might be. I mean, I'm talking about the climate, and but it doesn't matter. There's so many of those stories, those events, those situations that we face where we have to make that same decision.
So I think the resonance of those, climate and comes sort of very strongly. You and I might differ on whether or not there is a judging God in the hereafter who, we certainly do differ.
We do differ,
who addresses, what we've done right and wrong in our life. But seminal to Jewish teaching, and it's one of the reasons why Rabbi Sacks brings this story, is even if an awful lot of starfishes are going to die, as indeed will we. And there is no cheating death, coming back to Gurpreet's story. Even if everyone is going to die, it's what we do in this world that's really matters. And we have to make a difference in this world. It isn't just about the hereafter. It is about our interaction and making a difference here.
Absolutely. And of course, I don't think there's any judgment afterwards. I don't believe in that. Of course I don't. You're right to make the difference. But we are all existing on this planet now. That one we can all be certain of and share that view. So clearly that we can make a difference now. Whether we choose to or not, whatever the question might be, is the question, actually. And I guess almost. So humanism is about, and this will, I'm sure, resonate with other worldviews, but humanism is about living a good life. And a good life is a life that you decide for yourself what it's going to be. And for me, it means trying to make the world just a little bit better place, not just for human beings, and certainly not just for rich old white male human beings, but all human beings across the world, particularly those that need greater help. But beyond that, also, the other species that we share this planet with. Yeah.
So thank you. With that, Robin, can I just say a huge thank you to all three